specifically to what's been going on in Iraq?
Sure, it would obviously be an incursion into a sovereign nation, and that's not something to do lightly in any case, but we might, in fact, go after a regime target there from Iraq, or go after a camp or a military target that might be somewhere out there in their eastern desert. But yeah, very much different than going after the actual government of Syria, entirely different case.
And I recall in the weeks leading up to the war, there were suggestions that maybe there had been a transfer of some weapons of mass destruction in Iraq to near the Syria border. Do you think that's still something, an area that the U.S. will be looking at closely?
I think we've probably been watching it with satellites and a lot of other means very closely. I think we're going to scour that western desert and that border area now for any signs of weapons of mass destruction, chemical or biological weapons labs, or anything of the nature.
What about the regime change has taken effect, or at least the regime has been sent out of Iraq? To the extent that they would be across the border, if that's the case, why would they be a target? Is there a fear they could come back, that they could still influence events inside Iraq?
Well, I think that Saddam had about a crew of about 50, the Filthy 50, it's been called, henchmen that were part of that regime.
Playing card guys.
Exactly, the guys on the playing cards, and they have a lot of questions to answer for. Some of them just crimes against humanity. Some of them have questions to answer about weapons of mass destruction, locations. So it's to our advantage, or it's in our interest to go and find them. Again, if they're in Syria, I'm not suggesting that we might go in there just to grab them up. It's probably a political question where we'd ask the government of Syria to turn them over to us, but I'd say we shouldn't rule out the option of maybe a quick strike in there to grab someone up if we have that opportunity.
And then again, if there are foreign fighters that are staging from that side of the border, that would be more of a target, direct target?
I would think so. If there's some type of base or something 10 or 15 miles inside where we may see some jihadists forming to come across, that would be a legitimate target to strike with aircraft or something of the sort.
All right. Again, political question, but interesting scenarios to talk about. Major, thanks very much. Some very happy families right now. The relatives of freed American prisoners of war are talking about the moment they found out their sons and daughters were out of the hands of Saddam Hussein's regime. Coming up, the interview with the family of former prisoner of war Shoshana Johnson. Dateline NBC's Stone Phillips with the complete story you'll only hear from NBC News. MSNBC's live coverage continues after this.
From now on, long-distance, local, and high-speed internet will be together. Voice and data networks for companies large and small will be together. The innovations of one of the world's largest internet providers and the simplicity of one global network will be together. Together, under one name. MCI.
Martin, please, come in. Everyone know Martin from IT, the guy who linked all our applications together? What, no chair? Okay. Anyone whose department didn't make a 170% return on investment last quarter, step back from the table. Grab a seat, Martin.
System upgrade. What happens when the technology you invest in actually makes you money? Novell.
It's when most of the world sleeps. A time to reset our clock so we can begin a new day. It's all part of the rhythm of life. But for many, this healthy cycle is disrupted because sleep doesn't always come easy. Fortunately, there's Ambien. Ambien is a prescription sleep aid that can help you get a full night's sleep. While natural sleep is best, Ambien helps you fall asleep fast, stay asleep longer, and wake rested and refreshed, not groggy the next morning. No wonder Ambien is the #1 prescribed sleep aid in America. Until you know how Ambien will affect you, you shouldn't drive or operate machinery. Side effects may include drowsiness, dizziness, and diarrhea. You shouldn't take it with alcohol. Patients who abuse prescription sleep aids may become dependent. Prescription sleep aids are most often taken for 7 to 10 days as needed. Your doctor will advise you about taking them longer. Take Ambien only when you can devote a full 7 to 8 hours to sleep and wake rested and ready to start your day. Talk to your doctor about Ambien. Ambien works like a dream.
What can a Tyrannosaurus Rex teach us about a retirement plan? What's big one day may disappear the next. At Wachovia Securities, we learn from the world around us and provide financial advice for those who need to rebuild. Together, we can achieve uncommon results. Wachovia Securities.
Let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and the success of liberty.
Five past the hour here, the latest headlines. Secretary of State Colin Powell is raising the possibility of economic and diplomatic sanctions against Syria. Powell and other top officials accuse the country of developing weapons of mass destruction and sheltering members of Saddam Hussein's regime. Tomorrow's edition of the International Herald Tribune is reporting that the Bush administration is not planning to go to war with Syria. U.S. and Arab officials told the paper instead the U.S. wants to use its victory in Iraq as leverage to curb militant groups based in Syria from attacking Israel. And U.S. intelligence tells NBC News the source of Saddam Hussein's DNA was his half-brother, Watbaan Tikriti. Watbaan was captured by coalition troops on Friday. CENTCOM Commander General Tommy Franks told reporters yesterday that the military had Saddam Hussein's DNA but didn't reveal the source. For more on military operations inside Iraq, we're joined for the Washington Post by Vernon Loeb. He's the Pentagon reporter for the Post. Vernon, good evening to you.
Good evening.
The Pentagon says the major ground combat operations are over, yet we continue to hear about these so-called scattered pockets of resistance. And frankly, from watching the various battles on tape, I'm not sure which is which, what the difference is. What's your take on what's happening over there right now?
Well, I think U.S. forces are bumping into pockets of anywhere from, 5 to 25 guys. Major battles are over because there are no more major Iraqi units. Which means then the military significance of these sorts of battles is what? Well, there's no real military significance to them. I mean, they're significant if you're one of the soldiers being shot at and possibly killed, and over time they could become significant if there's a slow attrition of U.S. forces, but militarily there's not much significance to them. They're not going to drive the U.S. out of the country or really accomplish anything other than harassment. And then there's the conflicting signals. We're seeing some units being taken out now, some aircraft carriers being sent home, but there are more ground troops heading into Iraq right now, are there not? That's right. The Navy is pulling out 2 of 5 carrier battle groups and probably a third by next week. The Air Force is pulling out its stealth aircraft, but Army forces continue to flow in thousands at a time. The 4th Infantry Division entered the country today. Right behind it is the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment, and right behind that is the 1st Armored Division from Germany. So I think the Pentagon realizes it's going to need a lot of troops on the ground for the foreseeable future. Have the ground rules been worked out as to how humanitarian groups will work with the military, or will they not work together? Well, one of the things that's concerning humanitarian groups right now is that under this emergency supplemental that Congress passed on Saturday, they would actually, or they could find themselves working for the Pentagon. This is not something that they've done traditionally. They would much prefer to be working for the State Department and USAID, but Congress gave Bush the flexibility that he wanted to enable the military basically to oversee reconstruction projects, and that means these humanitarian groups could be working for the military.
But there's also, of course, a security situation that still remains tense, though, to have these sorts of groups in the country.
Right. The people at the Pentagon, say, look, they should not be complaining about working with the military. We're really the only people that can secure their activities over there, and in fact, humanitarian groups have been slow to go back into the country until the military, could make the country secure again. So I guess it's sort of a double-edged sword for them.
Okay, well, Vernon, we'll end it right there. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll read more in tomorrow's Washington Post.
Thank you.
It was the phone call of a lifetime, weeks after being captured in Nasir.
Is now being destroyed by U.S. troops. Some buildings, like the Information Ministry, are still on fire, and some looting continues throughout the streets of Baghdad. The looting and destruction of the National Museum in Baghdad has brought critics forward, saying the U.S. did not do enough to protect Iraq's antiquities, a charge Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld took exception to today.
We are in the process of offering rewards for people who will bring things back, but to try to lay off the fact of that unfortunate activity on a defect in a war plan, it strikes me as a stretch.
But overall, commanders on the ground say peace is gradually coming back to Iraq. And now the number of follow-on forces scheduled to come in is being scaled back.
As the nature of the conflict winds down, which it most assuredly is, the need for certain types of things declines and the need for other types of things increases.
The Army's 1st Cavalry Regiment, more than 10,000 strong out of Fort Hood, Texas, had deployment orders. Now they don't. The 1st Armored Division out of Germany is still heading in, but without its artillery. Defense officials say some U.S. ground forces in Iraq will be pulling out soon, while international forces will be filing in.
We're also on a very active effort to attract and encourage other countries to offer forces for the Phase 4 stabilization process. We've had good luck, good fortune.
Today, U.S. troops shut off an oil pipeline that runs from Iraq into Syria. Defense officials estimate in recent years up to 200,000 barrels of oil a day were pumped into Syria from Iraq, making millions of dollars for both countries in violation of the United Nations Oil for Food program.
Whether it's the only one and whether that has completely stopped the flow of oil between Iraq and Syria, I cannot tell you. We do not have perfect knowledge. We do know that they were instructed to shut it down, and they have been told us that they have.
And U.S. officials tell Fox tonight intelligence reports indicate that several of the top 55 Iraqi leaders have now escaped into Syria, something the Syrian ambassador to the United States strongly denies. Also tonight, senior defense officials say Defense Secretary Rumsfeld is planning a trip to Iraq very soon. Greta?
Thank you, Brett. Joining us from Tikrit, Iraq, is Fox News' Chris Klein. Chris?
Greta, dawn is just about to break into Tikrit, and as you might see, despite the night vision lens, we're still observing light discipline. We're on the grounds of one of two of Saddam's enormous palaces here in this stronghold of his, former stronghold of his. That is, I think probably nothing could be more befitting the collapse of this regime than to be in one of his palaces surrounded by a large force of United States Marines. We are with elements of the 1st Light Armored Reconnaissance Regiment of the 1st Marine Division, indeed one of the outfits that punched into this town only a couple of days ago. Now, things are relatively quiet for the time being. It must be said that there are still pockets of resistance in areas of this city. They are isolated, however, and scattered throughout the city. Also worth mentioning that on the other side of the river from this palace, the approach from the north into the city, that is via Kurdistan, the way that we came, is still not completely secure. There's a considerable swath of land between Kirkuk and Tikrit. The U.S. military on the ground here can't be in all places at all times, and there are scattered pockets of resistance in that piece of land that I describe, irregular units, perhaps some remnants of Special Republican Guard. And we are told by some of the Marine officers here, as well as perhaps as many as a few thousand Jordanian and Syrian jihadists, Islamic fanatics who volunteered to come and fight for this doomed regime. They are the ones we are told that have been offering the stiffest resistance. They are not rated very highly as military adversaries. We are told that they're very poor marksmen, but they are indeed fanatic, and they fight to the death, and they have to be winkled out one by one. Now, overnight, we've also seen not only the considerable armored strength on the ground here of these elements of the 1st Marine Division, but also some of their elements in the sky. There's a clear presence overhead. We saw quite a number of Huey helicopters and Cobra gunships patrolling. So the city would seem to be secure. Greta.
Chris, thank you. Joining us here in Washington, retired Navy SEAL Commander Martin Strong, retired Air Force Lieutenant General Tom McInerney, and retired Army Major General Bob Scales. General McInerney, Abu Abbas, terrorists, we've been looking for him for 17 years. Does that tie the Iraqi regime to terrorism, the fact that he's there?
I think it does, but there'll be other finds. The fact is that he was given safe harbor there for many years by Saddam indicates to me that other terrorists and other activity was going on there. It was kind of the, would you say, the retirement home for former terrorists. The fact is that's a good signal. It's one of the things that we talked about earlier before we went to war. We would start seeing these signals of the connection between terrorists. Those are coming. Also, those irregular fighters that are coming in, that came in primarily from Syria, but other countries, gives an indication of the connection to terrorists. These just aren't people off the street.
General Scales, Bret Baier just reported that many of the 55 we're looking for may have gone to Syria. Nonetheless, there's a huge tunnel system under Baghdad. Right. We haven't nearly gone through that, have we?
We've just begun to work our way. First of all, it takes a lot of effort to go through these tunnels. You don't know if they're booby-trapped. You don't know what's down there. Plus, I mean, the city is literally laced with these tunnel complexes, as well as the abandoned metro that they have underneath Baghdad is just full of ammunition, documents. Who knows what's down there? So, what's the hurry? Allow the soldiers to take their time to work their way through these underground complexes very methodically, to capture the documents, to find out if there are any remaining terrorists down there. Let's do it methodically, let's do it carefully, and let's do it thoroughly because we have time.
Commander Strong, how do you search those tunnels? They may be mined, they may be booby-trapped, and there are an awful lot of them.
Well, what you're going to do is you're going to advance with teams that have explosive ordnance disposal experts as part of the lead element, and they're going to look at gates and different entryways, and they're going to, investigate those first before anybody moves in. And if they have to, they may go ahead and blow those gates and entryways just as a precaution.
And Commander, in terms of the special operations at this point, I mean, they're very much on the ground helping to look for these 55 and these other terrorists, and even our POWs, or possible people who we're looking for at least.
That's right. I mean, I like to look at the special operations as the helpers and the hunters. The helpers are doing the work with, the Kurds and all the med caps and other, activities with humanitarian aid. But the hunters are your Navy SEALs and your Delta Force, and they're all over that country. They're on the border between Syria and Iraq. They are in those tunnels. They are in the city, and they've got those cards, they've got those photos, and they know who all the key players are.
Does that mean, Commander, that if Captain Spiker, who went down in '91, if he's there, we're going to find him?
If he's there and he's alive, we're going to find him. Now, the key to special operations and the success of special operations is intelligence. So the more the Iraqi people start to realize that we're there to help liberate, they're going to start coming out of the woodwork and start giving us all kinds of information. Now, the things that were state secrets before the regime was toppled, if we've killed everybody at the top or they're all on the run, they may be the only ones that know where a lot of these key issues, where the answers are to these key issues like weapons of mass destruction and Mr. Spiker.
You know, General McInerney, when you think about it, I mean, the President has done his TV presentation for the Iraqis. We've dropped an awful lot of paper telling them, that this is a liberation, this is not an invasion. Yet our best envoys are the men and women on the ground there. They're the ones that can get the information.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, since they're developing the relationships with the local community, no one does this better in the world than the American GI. They are marvelous. I saw them in World War II, at the end of World War II as a boy living in Germany, the relationship. I've seen them in Vietnam, all over the world. They're very good at establishing that relationship. And then people start to talk. And this is the lower people that saw different things. You clearly have the songbirds up, the leadership, the chief scientist, the chief nuclear scientist, all these people that will start to talk.
You know what I like about, I mean, with the embedded journalists, I actually believe our journalists aren't peddling us a bunch of bad information. I mean, there's always sort of curiosity whether the military is trying to PR us with something, but they're sending back very favorable information of the GIs on the ground.
Well, that's true. I mean, that is ground truth. You can't fake that. They're going to do it, and that's one of the great things I think about the embedded. The embeds have been terrific to give us a clear picture, a snapshot of what's going on.
General Scales Museum, lots of people are upset. Is there, I mean, not to criticize and look backwards, but what can we do in the future? What are we learning from that?
Well, you know, I'm a historian myself, and so I can understand the horror that the curators must have felt when they saw the remains. But remember now, this occurred at a time of enormous chaos, when soldiers early in the campaign were simply trying to stay alive and trying to take out pockets of resistance, and it was that you always have that first 2 or 3 days when you enter a city when chaos is everywhere, not just in the museums but in the ministries and everywhere else for that matter.
But they get transformed from soldiers to sort of like policemen. Yeah. I mean, like, how are they supposed to stop this?
How the soldiers are supposed to stop it? They can't. I mean, you know, at the time the soldiers were trying to fight the Fedayeen was the time the looting occurred. Now that the Fedayeen have been destroyed, the soldiers have turned very quickly, as Tom says, from armed soldiers into stability soldiers who are there to try to establish peace and order. But you're going to go through a period of chaos when the soldiers can't do two things at once, and that's essentially what happened here. The soldiers are well intended. If you see what they're doing now in the city, you can see that they're doing a wonderful job of transitioning from fighters into soldiers who are there to take care of the population.
As always, gentlemen, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Up next, the Pentagon offers a reward for information leading to the arrest of Saddam and his 2 sons. Does that mean intelligence suggests they are alive? And later, is it possible Saddam's top lieutenants are hiding out in Syria without Syria's knowledge?
In the desire to move ideas forward, printing in black and white has served us well. But color is more effective. The fly in the ointment: cost. Imagine a multi-function printer that gives you low-cost color without raising the cost of your black and white. The new Officio 1232 from Ricoh. Ricoh.
Yeah, look what Daddy's got, huh? Yeah. Look, watch Daddy. It's so good. Nummy, nummy. Look, it's good. Daddy likes it. It's good. Whew. It's good.
At least you can count on the Toro Time Cutter Z mower, the most amazingly maneuverable Toro ever.
Nobody delivers expert Motorcraft brake service in 2 hours or less like your participating Ford, Lincoln, or Mercury dealership. Or we'll give you a free oil change. Plus, enter to win trips to the Caribbean or to the world premiere of the hot new movie Pirates of the Caribbean: The Curse of the Black Pearl.
Nobody can do auto service like we do.
Cargill believes there is potential in each of us. And as our lives unfold, that potential is transformed into human accomplishment. The food we eat to nourish our bodies and minds has much to do with what we make of our lives. Every day, Cargill works at the complex job of satisfying the world's diverse appetite for food. Cargill, nourishing the potential in each of us.
This government is acting to protect the American people from the threats of a new era. In Iraq, the regime of Saddam Hussein is no more.
You know, he may be out of power, but President Bush still wants his head, dead or alive. And now the Pentagon is offering big bucks to Iraqis who lead us to Saddam and or his men. But did Saddam already skip town? Joining us from New York is the executive editor of the London Sunday Telegraph, Con Coughlin, also the author of Saddam, King of Terror. Welcome, sir.
Good evening, Greta.
All right, I know we don't know for sure, but do you know an awful lot about Saddam and his history and his tunnels and everything else? What do you think, dead or alive?
I think on balance, I'll go for him being alive. And I think the fact that they're now going to put a big reward on his head suggests that the commanders at CENTCOM also think he's alive and that he escaped that last bomb blast. The really interesting thing that I'm picking up, Greta, is that Saddam may even have employed a double agent to set up that last bombing raid on the restaurant. Of course, Saddam was desperate to find out how his security had been breached in the first bombing attack. He'd never really been targeted like this before, and he was desperate to find out if there was a traitor there, how the Americans were intercepting his communications. And so basically, that second bombing raid on the restaurant could well have been a setup by Saddam. He's been playing mind games right throughout this conflict.
Do you think there's any possibility on Monday, March 17th, President Putin supposedly sent a Russian envoy to Baghdad to convince Saddam to leave? Do you think that he actually spoke to Saddam, or could it have been a double, so Saddam could have gotten out even before then?
Well, I've actually read an interview that Yevgeny Primakov, the Russian envoy, gave in Moscow at the weekend. And Primakov, who met Saddam during the Gulf War, and conducted the negotiations then on behalf of Gorbachev. I mean, he knows Saddam pretty well. He's convinced he did see Saddam, and of course the reaction he got from Saddam was typically Saddam. When Primakov said, look, you know, the Americans really are serious, why don't you just step down and save your country all this trouble? And Saddam just sort of shrugged and left the room, and that's a very Saddam gesture. Not even the best trained double can do that, Greta.
And of course, if he had left, he'd also would have he'd probably be spending his monies and riches in some other country without the hardship as well. Would have been a lot better for him personally.
Yes, we're quite. He could have spent all this money in Paris, Greta.
Indeed. All right, Con. In terms of on the 19th of March, when we had the bombing of the home where we thought Saddam was, do you believe that that was Saddam Hussein? Intelligence suggested that he was there. Do you think that was Saddam?
Yeah, I think Saddam was there, and I think Saddam was injured. He didn't sustain critical injuries, but he was certainly injured in that raid. But the more serious damage, of course, was having his whereabouts betrayed. So, I mean, that was a very good hit.
And so, what is your hypothesis? Is he still in Iraq, hiding down tunnels, hiding in a safe house, or did he get out, and who helped him?
Well, he's got lots of people who can help him get out. But people were saying to me at the weekend that it's quite feasible for Saddam to go to ground in Baghdad. Baghdad is a very big city, 5-odd million people. There will be loyalists there that will look after him. There are these this labyrinth of underneath tunnels that he could hide in. But I would say that some of his closest inner circle have gone to Damascus. I'm told his first wife, Sajida, and her 2 daughters went to Damascus, picked up visas, and have gone to another country. So when the Syrians say there aren't Iraqis in Damascus, they might be correct. But if we ask the Syrians, are they facilitating the transportation of senior Baathists out of Iraq? Well, that's another question.
Well, then the Syrians would also know if they picked up visas to what other countries? Where would they have gone from there?
The really intriguing thing, Greta, is that Western intelligence is very, very interested in what's going on at the French embassy in Damascus. Apparently there's a lot of activity in the visa section of the French embassy. What are the French playing at? Jacques Chirac had a conversation today with President Bush. They're trying to be friends again. Jacques Chirac said he didn't know anything about what was going on in Damascus. Well, be that as it may, but it's not beyond the bounds of possibility that the French intelligence services are up to their old tricks. You know, whatever's good for France is good for them.
All right, Con. Loved your book, by the way. Appreciate it. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure, Greta.
Up next, the Pentagon has confirmed to Fox several of the top Iraqi leadership has escaped Iraq. Are they in Syria, or did they go to another country? And later, we're going to switch gears, and we're going to take you to California for a late-breaking update on those bodies that washed up in the San Francisco Bay. Is it Lacey Peterson?
Tonight at 11 p.m. Eastern for the latest developments in Operation Iraqi Freedom. Stay with Fox News Channel's continuing overnight coverage, hosted by Shepard Smith.
My client's dream was to have the financial freedom to give up his big city medical practice for a small group of patients who needed him more in a place where doctors are all too scarce. So I embraced that dream with unwavering attention and made it my own. Because helping people realize dreams is what I do at Morgan Stanley. One client at a time.
Has anybody checked the interior?
Some of the finest leather I've ever seen.
Premium leather?
Rear seat DVD entertainment system.
Entertainment system?
And navigation.
Power rear door.
11 speaker Mark Levinson audio.
Mark Levinson audio?
It's a camera. It's a rear view camera.
Introducing the entirely new Lexus RX 330. Putting the world on notice again.
Are you a homeowner? Do you want to refinance and lower your payments? Or get a home equity loan to consolidate bills or get extra cash? Just call America's Lending Partners. America's Lending Partners is a large network of lenders who offer hundreds of loan options. With just one phone call, we match your loan request with up to 4 prominent lenders. Whether your credit is less than perfect or it's perfect but you don't have a lot of equity, America's Lending Partners can help you. And best of all, our service is free. Call America's Lending Partners right now.
You know, before Laura goes to college, I was thinking she could use her own car.
Sure.
VHIX.com makes it easy to design exactly the car you want.
You're giving our daughter that brand new $50,000 coupe.
No, I'm giving our daughter that slightly used hatchback in the garage.
Because when you're happy, everyone's happy.
This, just my replacement vehicle.
VHIX.com, roadmap to the automotive world.
Some Iraqi officials who are guilty of crimes, or at least strongly suspected of crimes, may be seeking haven in Syria. We don't believe Syria should find this in their interest to give refuge, to give haven to these sorts of individuals who should be returned to Iraq to face the justice that will be meted out by the Iraqi people. And we will make these points to Syria strongly.
Secretary of State Colin Powell put Syria on notice today, but added there is no U.S. war plan in the works. Just as he issued the warning, U.S. officials confirmed to Fox News that several of Iraq's top leaders escaped to Syria. Joining us in Washington is Martin Seif, Chief News Analyst for UPI International, and Bill Christo, editor of the Weekly Standard. Bill, if they're in Syria, what can we do?
Well, we can ask Syria to hand them over or to let us come in and get them.
And the answer will be?
Well, it depends how worried Syria is about our using various forms of pressure on them, ranging from cutting off the oil pipeline to possible special operations and military force. Syria has terrorist camps in the Bekaa Valley. Those could be taken out by air attack, and probably should be anyway, since there's an awful lot of innocent blood on those terrorist hands.
Is there any economic pressure to put on Syria by us?
Well, the oil pipeline from Iraq, which
is that? But we've already cut that. We cut that off today.
We stopped that for now, so
right.
That's depriving the Syrian government of a lot of revenues. Look, it's very much worth trying. I don't think we should sit back and simply let the Iraqis escape to Syria and let Syria harbor war criminals.
Martin, what's going to happen?
Well, certainly put pressure on Syria. How far it goes, we'll see. I don't rule out the use of military force possibly to topple the Ba'ath regime. It probably won't go that far, but one can't rule it out. But certainly we're putting pressure on them, and we'll be putting more pressure on them.
What's the interest of the Syrian government at this point? I mean, they have harbored terrorists in their country. They certainly are, you know, they've picked the wrong team in this battle.
Yeah.
I mean, there's, you know, what do they have going for them?
absolutely nothing at all, Greta. But there's a great irony to this, and that is that for 30 years, Saddam Hussein's greatest enemy was President Hafez Assad of Syria. They had rival Ba'ath regimes. Each of them claimed to be the only true interpreters of Arab socialism, the Ba'ath movement. They hated each other like poison. Assad ran a smaller country than Iraq. He had an equally ferocious regime in most ways. But he didn't trust Saddam one inch. But after he died 3 years ago, his son Bashar took over. He had no serious background in politics before that.
He's an ophthalmologist.
Yes, exactly. He's an eye doctor. He worked in London. And there were many silly articles written in the media when he took over, saying that he would be an internet prince, that like King Abdullah of Jordan and King Mohammed of Morocco, he would liberalize Syria and he would moderate his policies. Instead, he made his foreign policies more extreme than even his father's were. But it's really ironic that he backed Iraq, because he's backing his father's archenemy. And if Saddam had lived, if he had somehow survived this war, he would certainly, I think, have had Bashar's head on a pole somewhere down the line. So there's a great irony that the only place the Iraqis, exactly that, they can only flee to Damascus of all places.
All right, Bill, the Israeli Prime Minister Sharon today made a statement. He described the president of Syria as dangerous and prone to risky mistakes. So he's getting into the dialogue right now. Your thoughts on that? Not whether it's true or not, but that the Prime Minister is speaking out.
Well, look, if you're interested in an Israeli-Palestinian peace process, one thing that would help a lot would be to get Syria to pull the plug on the terrorist groups that are headquartered in Damascus. Iran and Syria are the two main sponsors of terrorist attacks on Israel, and Iran does it through Syria, since Iran isn't contiguous with Israel in any way. So you could really help out the chances for peace process, the chances for Israelis believing that a Palestinian state would not be a terrorist state, if you could put pressure on Syria to get rid of the terrorist groups that they've been sponsoring. You know, the one thing I think one can say is this: the Iraq war will change a lot of things, and you're seeing it right away. It may, as Martin says, it may lead to military action against Syria. It may lead to a change in the Israeli-Palestinian situation. The president called Jacques Chirac today.
Did he call him, or did Jacques, the president of France?
No, my colleague Chris Caldwell was interviewing President Chirac of France in the Champs-Élysées, and an aide came hustling in and whispered audibly to Chris, to President Chirac, President Bush is on the phone.
Did he jump?
And he moved with some alacrity, I think, and took the phone call. And the interesting question is, was President Bush being nice to, making up with Jacques Chirac, or was he asking him, was he asking France to help out with Syria? France and Syria have pretty close relations.
And that's the first time since February 7th that they've spoken. I mean, it's been months.
Right. I mean, there's a lot happening, and this is, I think, the main one of the, the world will be different after this war, and all kinds of things that we don't expect to happen will happen. The thing that strikes me the most is the president, I think, very much thinks of the war in Iraq as a battle in Iraq, as a battle in an ongoing war on terror and on dictators developing weapons of mass destruction. It doesn't mean that all the future battles will be military battles, just as the Cold War was full of diplomatic and economic and political battles. But the president does not think, we got rid of Saddam Hussein's regime, let's heave a big sigh of relief and relax. That's not been his attitude at all. His attitude is, where do we go next in the war on terror? Where do we go next in dealing with weapons of mass destruction?
What's the European view, Martin, on on the Syria issue as it's now sort of
That's very interesting. I would say, and I'd be interested in Bill's comments on this, I don't think they'd be very different. Retreat, confusion, realignment. They were the French and when we say the Europeans, we're primarily talking about the French and the Germans. The Spanish and Italian governments, of course, backed us very strongly on the Iraq issue. But as far as Syria goes, France in particular takes the lead. Syria is a Francophone country. France effectively ran Syria for a quarter of a century up to 1946, retained an interest there. The French don't want us going into Syria, but they're scared of crossing the president. They
didn't make the first phone call, though, today, which is sort of interesting. It's sort of interesting that it was President Bush who made the first call to Jacques Chirac, but I guess that's for tomorrow.
Precisely, but I think that's revealing, too, because this doesn't reveal weakness in Washington. It reveals strength and confidence in Washington. We're putting the pressure on the Elysee Palace.
And indeed, it may be extending the olive branch, being sort of the bigger of the two guys.
Not necessarily the olive branch, I suspect.
Who knows? Well, the plot thickens. Gentlemen, stand by. Coming up, have police found Laci Peterson? The story when we come back.
Regarding the DNA of those bodies, it's going to take anywhere from a few days to several weeks to get those results.
Your home, it's so, interesting.
Oh, termites, they hate ice, so we redid the whole house. This is Kate.
Nice to meet you.
Here's a better idea. Call Terminix. More people trust our unlimited lifetime protection plan. 1-800-TERMINIX.
Emerging science suggests that lycopene is one of the ingredients in tomatoes that may help reduce the risk of heart disease.
Now Centrum and Centrum Silver have lycopene. Another reason to take your Centrum.
New Centrum with lycopene. Now more complete from A to zinc.
The Saab 9-3 Sports Sedan just received a 5-star rating for collision safety performance from the European New Car Assessment Program.
Everybody knows My Mailboxes, etc. is the best place to pack and ship. But Brown said, let's take it to the next level. You know, ramp it up. Live the dream. We're becoming the UPS store with new low rates direct from UPS and the same great people to help with packing, copying, and mailbox services. You may notice some changes. New sign, new shirt. The shorts will be here soon.
New low rates, same great service. Call 1-800-PICK-UPS.
Tomorrow, the new war on terror. As we stand ready, capable, and able to defend our nation from mounting global threats, are we stretching ourselves too thin? Plus, the president's plans, from jump-starting the economy to rebuilding Iraq. We have reaction, analysis, and insight. At 5, it's the big story. At 6, watch Special Report. At 7, it's the Fox Report, only on Fox News Channel.
We did not allow any person or anybody from the Iraqi leadership or anybody from the Iraqi family to come to our country. We said it also in order to explain to American people and to the other people all over the world that Syria has closed its border with Iraq.
In a relatively rare public comment, Syria's U.S. ambassador denying Syria is harboring Iraqi leaders. We are back with Martin Seif, Chief News Analyst for UPI International, and Bill Kristol, Editor of the Weekly Standard. Martin, I hate to put you in a rough spot, but is the Syrian ambassador, you believe him?
Yes, no. I think, as one often does in diplomacy, he's speaking the literal truth now, but I think some of the points your previous guests made are very valid. He can say that now. They can close the border because the key Iraqis who managed to get through have already gotten through and probably aren't even in Syria or Damascus anymore, but they did let some people through. And we've had some intriguing reports that the Iraqis may have tried to smuggle elements of weapons of mass destruction, possibly uranium or chemical or other material through earlier, and that's not been confirmed. But our forces were reported a couple of days ago in having unusually intense, by this war's standards, firefights with Iraqi Guard units on the borders, that there was an effort to get something or some things through to Syria.
Yeah, we arrested a chief Iraqi scientist,
yes,
nuclear scientist in the Gulf, who had gotten there through Syria. So I think it's pretty indisputable that at least some people got through.
Where are they going? I mean, if Syria is simply a conduit, where's the hospitable country?
Who knows? There are a lot of the Gulf, Yemen. There are lots of barren areas. You know, it's a sea. I mean, Syria gives you access to the Mediterranean.
Exactly.
You can go to a lot of places. So, I mean, I think I'm struck by this. This president, whatever, agree with him, disagree with him. What we've learned over the last 18 months is he doesn't really bluff, and he doesn't make threats that he's not serious about. The fact that he and the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State all started targeting Syria in a pretty serious way and saying, look, you've got to change the way you're behaving or else, over the last few days, suggests to me that their unhappiness with Syria went beyond a mere general unhappiness that Syria continues to harbor terrorist groups, which it's done for a long time, or has some chemical weapons, which it's had for a long time. There must have been particular actions that Syria had undertaken and was undertaking that we really took seriously. And I'm not sure we know, I think we don't know what all of them are, but I just don't think the president would cavalierly start putting such a spotlight on Syria.
Well, he hasn't done that yet. I mean, he's actually
he's pretty close.
That's what I mean. The president has been pretty plain. I mean, he doesn't. There's no confusion when he speaks.
Right. And if you look at other countries, I mean, North Korea, for example, which did all kinds of very bad things from our point of view, we weren't ready to take any serious action against North Korea, and the president made that pretty clear. He's not a big bluffer. So I think when he starts saying, "Look, Syria's got to change its ways," we are very worried, I think, about Syria, either in terms of helping Iraqi regime leaders out, or possibly, as Martin says, and this would be the much worse thing, actually smuggling weapons of mass destruction out through Syria.
If I can add a point there, I'm in agreement with you on this, Bill. I'd rather not be, obviously, because it's a grim scenario. Having said that, first of all, in the last 3 years, since Bashar succeeded his father, there was a remarkable amount of intelligence and military cooperation between the two Ba'ath regimes. And in fact, a lot of veteran Middle East hands felt that this showed Bashar's naivety and weakness, because, of course, Saddam had hated his father for 30 years. The older Assad had stood in the way of Saddam's ambitions. And Saddam didn't just bear grudges, he bore grudges, as we know, against everybody who's related. So Bashar would have been in the firing line. The fact remains, this happened. So there was a great deal of intelligence cooperation and military cooperation as well. They had very detailed technical, tactical cooperation talks between both sides. The militaries have been talking to each other and worked together. This exists. One other point I'll add, which I've seen put nowhere else: where could they go from Syria? There's one place which...
And you got 30 seconds to tell me where
Argentina, because there's a large Syrian community in Argentina, and terrorist groups with ties to Syria have been very active in Argentina.
And there's a little bit of a history there, sort of.
Exactly.
A little bit. I was being sort of tongue-in-cheek about a place for people to go to. Anyway, gentlemen, thank you both very much.
Thank you, Greta.
Up next, we're going to take you to California, where Lacey Peterson's family is waiting for word on those two bodies found yesterday. A person who knows what clothes were found and much more about the grisly discovery joins us next.
We're always hopeful. We'll continue to be hopeful, but we also want to maintain our diligence over this investigation, do it in a methodical way, which we've had since day one, and we're continuing to do that. We're not going to allow the hype to interfere in the investigation.
A big terror bust in Baghdad. Good evening, everybody. I'm Jane Skinner. Allied troops have nabbed Abu Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Liberation Front. You may remember he masterminded the 1985 hijacking of the Achille Lauro cruise ship off the coast of Egypt, killing disabled American Leon Klinghoffer. He was shot and rolled overboard in his wheelchair. We're told that special forces captured Abbas in a raid on his house just outside Baghdad. U.S. officials also are telling Fox News that several of the 55 most wanted former Iraqi regime members have in fact escaped to Syria. The U.S. also accuses the country of supporting terrorism and having chemical weapons. Syria is denying all this. Meanwhile, U.S. troops are now at the site in Baghdad where a military strike leveled a building last week. Saddam Hussein was believed to be inside with his sons. It is still not known if any of them were killed. Excavation at the site has not started yet, and it may be some time before the digging begins. The USS Toledo is the first U.S. submarine from Operation Iraqi Freedom to come home. The Los Angeles-class attack sub and the crew of 134 returned to home base in Connecticut after 2 months at sea. Well, there's an Amber Alert in Florida tonight for an 11-month-old boy. Orlando police say his mother snatched him from the hospital where he was being treated for burns. The child was supposed to stay there pending an investigation into his injuries. Shepard Smith is in at the top of the hour. On the Record with Greta continues after the break.
Manager, register 5.
Hey, we're out of... No, we're not. It's like I think it, and it happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
.NET Connected Software helps you connect your supply chain. That's software for the agile business. From Microsoft.
What stands the test of time? Our strongest bonds, our fundamental values. At New York Life, our humanity, integrity, and financial strength provide protection and security for millions of families through changing times. Values that make New York life the company you keep.
Deal? We have a bachelorette party that wants to find a great hotel in Florida, and money's tight. Destination Orbitz.
Well, sir, our new hotel matrix is loaded with options, and I just negotiated another Orbitz saver for a hotel in Miami. In fact, Hunt and Star are there right now.
This Orbitz Saver hotel's amazing, close to the beach, and the view's magnificent.
It certainly is.
Hi, Candy. The bachelorettes will be pleased. Another mission accomplished, Deal.
To my oldest son, I leave the chateau on the French Riviera. To my only daughter, the Manhattan penthouse. To my youngest son, I bequeath 150 acres of uninhabitable swampland.
Terrible.
With its amazing four-wheel drive capabilities, Jeep Grand Cherokee can make even the most unappealing terrain a lot more desirable.
We take you to California for a late-breaking update on those two bodies discovered in the San Francisco Bay Area. Could it be Laci Peterson and her son? Matt Krupnick of the Contra Costa Times joins us from Modesto. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you.
Matt, I know that the police have not identified it as Laci Peterson and her son, but what can you tell me that might indicate that indeed it is Laci and her son?
Well, the Modesto police said today that they were interested in the fact that these two bodies were found about a mile apart from one another, and especially near the area where Scott Peterson is known to have gone fishing on the day of Laci's disappearance. And they also have told us that they found an adult woman, and they also found a full-term male fetus, and that the woman was about 5'3" or so, which is approximately the same height as Laci Peterson was.
How was the woman dressed?
You know, they said that some police sources in Contra Costa County have told our paper that they found the woman dressed in undergarments, and that they may have been actually maternity undergarments, which would point out that it could very possibly, therefore, be Laci Peterson.
Was there any, I've seen it printed and I've heard many times very grisly details about the condition of the woman who was discovered, but was there anything about the condition that would suggest there's any way linked to Scott Peterson, or is it simply still so early in the investigation?
From what they're telling us, it sounds like they still do not officially consider him a suspect, and in fact the Modesto police detective who talked to the media today here told us that he doesn't even know where Scott Peterson is. The police have said that the body was missing a few parts to it, but there's nothing, in fact, that would link it decisively and definitively to Scott Peterson.
Do they have any explanation why the infant was found about a mile away from the adult woman? Or even if do they know for certain whether the infant is the child of the woman?
You know, they had not determined that the last we heard. What I was told by a forensic pathologist I spoke to yesterday was that it's not uncommon for a pregnant woman who is either buried normally or perhaps dumped in the ocean to give birth to that child post-mortem, that the baby, because of the gases that build up in the mother's body, would be pushed out and could therefore drift, and that the baby could even possibly be in better shape than the mother as far as decomposition goes, because babies are more sterile, have not been exposed to the same sort of germs and gases that adults have.
In terms of the undergarments, have there been any outer garments found along the shore or anything else to perhaps identify this woman?
Not that I've heard of. All that we've heard about are the undergarments that have been described as maternity undergarments that were on the woman herself when she was found, but I have not heard of any clothing other than that was found at the scene.
You know, Matt, it's sort of odd. The infant was found on Sunday. Did that then provoke a search for the woman, or was it just coincidental that the following day a woman was found?
Yeah, I'm not positive about that, but my understanding is that it was a hiker or a jogger who found the baby in the area where it was found, and then that the woman was found because she had washed ashore. So I don't know for sure, but my understanding is that they were two separate coincidental occurrences.
Let me make one quick thing. When you say a hiker found it, was the infant in the water as well?
No, I'm sorry. The infant was found actually on the shore near the water, but not actually in the water.
All right. Matt, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Lacey's husband says his wife vanished on Christmas Eve. That's nearly 4 months ago. Would it be unusual for the bodies to take that long to wash up on land? Joining us on the phone from Berkeley, California is Chief Executive Officer for Berkeley Marina-based OCSC Sailing School, Richard Jepson. Welcome, Rich.
Evening, Greta.
Rich, what do you make of the fact that, this is early on the investigation, but Laci Peterson disappeared Christmas Eve. Does it strike you as unusual that if indeed this is Laci Peterson and she was in the water on Christmas Eve, that we would suddenly be discovering her body now?
Well, it might be unusual, but it's certainly believable. The Olympic Circle sailing area right there east of the shipping lanes in Berkeley is an area that is pretty shallow and has lots of conflicting factors. The current that's there is sometimes wind-driven. It's obviously tidal-driven. It has rain runoff, and the current can move in alternately several different directions over a period of days and weeks, and it's never extremely strong there, interestingly, except for the 2 days prior to the discovery, when we had a very strong wind out of the south, which would be consistent with taking objects that are floating in or under the water or resting lightly on the bottom of the bay, and the wind-driven waves moving them gradually towards the shore where those two bodies were found.
Where, Rich, in relationship is the Berkeley Marina to where the woman's body was found? Is it north, south, distance?
Right. The Berkeley Marina is about 2 nautical miles south of where the woman's body was found and a nautical mile south of where the fetus was found.
And do the currents not, they don't push out to sea there, but is it connected to the San Francisco Bay, or
right.
Is that the San Francisco Bay?
It's definitely a part of the San Francisco Bay. We're only 9 nautical miles from the Golden Gate, but one of the interesting things about the bay is that not only does it have microclimates, but it really has micro-regions of wildly varying current levels. So, for instance, at the Golden Gate Bridge, the volume of water that runs out of the Mississippi River runs out in and out of the Golden Gate Bridge area every day, but a tiny fraction of that is moving about just 9 nautical miles east because the water is so shallow by comparison. So you also have geographic factors where the large area, the delta that leads up into the mountains to the north and the South Bay leading down to San Jose are large bodies of water that have a big impact on how the water moves horizontally in this Olympic Circle sailing area. And so it would be entirely conceivable that her body would spend a lot of time not moving very far out in the middle of the bay until some dramatic occurrence like the storm we had over the weekend.
All right, Rich, thank you very much. I appreciate you helping us out.
Good luck.
Up next, what do all these new clues mean?
Tonight at 11 p.m. Eastern for the latest developments in Operation Iraqi Freedom. Stay with Fox News Channel's continuing overnight coverage, hosted by Shepard Smith.
I'm kind of shy.
I'm easygoing.
I'm really loud.
I'm pretty much to myself.
I'm a brat.
Full Gospel Church International. For people like you.
The church is not an exclusive society. It's a family of diverse people that face universal challenges, people learning to cope with life and who appreciate a good laugh.
Full Gospel Church International. Call 925-682-5918 for people like you.
All of Melanie's dreams have come true.
Will you marry me?
Oh my God.
Pick one.
Now she's going home to Alabama to plan her wedding.
Melanie? Look at you! Look at you! You have a baby!
in a bar.
But she didn't expect to fall back in love with her high school sweetheart.
I'm really happy in New York.
This fits too.
See Reese Witherspoon in Sweet Home Alabama on in-demand pay-per-view. Why go out when you can bring home this romantic comedy on Comcast?
Also mean turmoil for families caught in the conflict who must flee their homes.
American Red Cross, can I help you?
The American Red Cross is working around the clock and around the world to help people endure these very trying times. We keep men and women in the armed forces connected with their families during emergencies, and we deliver humanitarian aid to those caught in the crossfire. The Red Cross is the one you've always turned to in times of need. That time is now. Please, we need your financial support for these urgent services. Call 1-800-HELP-NOW or visit redcross.org. Thanks for doing your part.
NASCAR Bud Bowl qualifying lives on Speed Channel.
Qualifying's important. Probably one of the most pressure situations you're going to be in all weekend. Your weekend normally goes pretty good when you sit on the pole.
NASCAR Bud Bowl qualifying on Speed Channel, the home of NASCAR TV.
We're still at the same place we were before. He's not been ruled out as a suspect, nor have we named him as a suspect. There is no frustration on my part regarding Scott Peterson. Again, I don't know where Scott Peterson is, and if I did, I would not respond to it anyway.
Tonight we're waiting for word on the identity of those two bodies found along the California coast, and we've just received some new information from the Contra Costa Times. We're joined by forensic pathologist Dr. Cyril Weck, criminal defense attorney Mark Garrigus, criminal defense attorney Bernie Grimm, and on the phone, former LAPD homicide detective Mark Furman. Dr. Weck, let me ask you the question that is, I mean, look, murder cases are always extremely ugly, extremely gruesome, but manner of death is something that's got to be determined. So let me ask you the real ugly question right off the top. She has missing body parts. Could that come from decomposition and from being in the water, or is that from someone doing that to her?
I think most likely neither. My first choice would be that something was tied around her neck and around her lower waist or abdomen to something heavy, such as a big stone or concrete or cement or so on, to cause the body to sink, and then the weight pulling on those parts of the body led to the dismemberment. I see no reason why the dismemberment would have occurred, because they didn't even take the hands, so you can't say, well, they didn't want the face or the hands to be available for fingerprint, or the hands or the face for dental records. The cause of death, I don't think is related to this either. So I believe that if there is the ability, and I don't know how large a body of water it is, to send down some divers, there's a very real chance that they will find those body parts, and they very likely will be attached to some heavy weights. That may account, too, for the fact that these bodies have been there for that long. I agree with what was said earlier, and that the fetus came out as a result of postmortem decomposition of the mother, eventually expulsion, but insofar as why the fetus may be in better condition, not only because of the relatively more sterile environment, less bacteria, but because the fetus was protected within the uterine cavity. Could have been for weeks. That fetus may not have been extracted, expelled from the uterus up until a week or two ago. Nobody will ever know. But I think that's why the fetus, they described it as a male. That means the genitalia were there. To be able to identify genitalia on a baby like this, and those are parts of the tissues that go first in a state of decomposition, indicates to me that the baby was protected. So the identification will be made with DNA, mitochondrial DNA, baby to mother DNA of the mother to the known DNA of Mrs. Peterson, and then get some blood, which they probably already have for Mr. Peterson, to definitively establish the identity of the baby as their baby, and then work from there.
All right, Mark, look, you know, let's face it, the police have said that Scott Peterson is not a suspect, but Mark Furman raised the question last night as a strange coincidence that that they find maybe Lacey Peterson. We don't know it's Lacey Peterson, but they find this woman's body and an infant about a mile from where he said he was. What your thought on that?
The problem is when they say he's not a suspect, they're playing possum to some degree. He clearly is the suspect. They've got, when they come back and they identify that this is Laci Peterson and this is the child, which they most probably or most assuredly will, because there aren't a whole lot of other 8-month or 9-month pregnant women who've gone disappearing recently or in the last year, such that you could still have a baby that would be in this kind of condition. They're going to have, as soon as they make that link, they're going to have probable cause at that point. It's just a matter of putting it all together. I mean, either somebody decided to go out and frame Scott Peterson by waiting and disposing of the body right there within a mile or 2 miles of where he said he was, or he didn't think through exactly what was happening when he disposed of the body. They've got, contrary to what they say, they've got more than enough probable cause to either file a criminal complaint or to indict him with a grand jury.
All right, gentlemen, stand by. We still have Mark Fuhrman and Bernie Grimm here. We have much more on this breaking news story in Modesto when we come back.
Last night, I watched my daughter sleeping, smelling of soap and tangle-free shampoo. And suddenly, the responsibility of preparing that little human being for the world was overwhelming. I'm 36 and single, and I'm strong. That's why I'm here.
If you're searching for something to believe in, for your children to believe in, our hearts, our minds, and our doors are always open. The people of the United Methodist Church.
Very funny. What?
For that long road to maturity, we'll be there.
It's almost 200,000 people in over 40 countries, working as one. It's 10 inventions every business day. And not all of them automotive. It's going from the Indy 500 to the Fortune 500. It's Delphi, where slowing down is not an option. Gotta go.
Announcing non-drowsy allergy medicine you can take right when you need it. It's Alavert. New Alavert starts dissolving the instant it touches your tongue, without water. So Alavert is non-drowsy relief you can take inside, outside, in your car, wherever you are. Get prescription-strength, non-drowsy, 24-hour relief. Even Claritin can't beat. New quick-dissolving Alavert. Allergy medicine you can take right when you need it, wherever you are.
Tomorrow, the accusations.
Iraqi officials may be seeking haven in Syria.
How serious is the problem with Syria? Plus, a grisly discovery. Are investigators any closer to solving the Laci Peterson case? At 8, it's the O'Reilly Factor. At 9, watch Hannity and Combs. At 10, go On the Record. Only on the Fox News Channel.
We're back with forensic pathologist Dr. Cyril Wecht, criminal defense attorney Mark Garrigus, criminal defense attorney Bernie Grimm, and on the phone, former LAPD homicide detective Mark Fuhrman. Bernie, what do you think Scott Peterson's thinking tonight?
He's thinking I'm in trouble. I guess he probably thought he was in trouble before, but, you know, no pun intended, he's in much deeper water than he was before. The bigger problem we talked about on the break is in a case against him, what they would need to do would be to bring him close to that body to establish that he had some contact with her or drowned her there or hit her on the head there. He put himself in the marina a mile away. That was his own alibi, and he put himself within a mile of
He gave him a receipt.
He gave him a receipt. He put himself within a mile of the body, which is Dr. Wecht offered a very clever and fascinating version of what happened that seems to make sense, that the body was weighted, became dislodged, and then the currents dragged it down, and then both bodies, unfortunately, for Scott Peterson surfaced. Gruesome and very heart-wrenching story.
Mark, you've gotten indictments or gone for charges based on your experience as a California police officer. No eyewitnesses, no confession. He totally denies it. Circumstantial evidence. Do you have enough to go get an arrest warrant?
Oh, absolutely. I think there was enough to go get an arrest warrant with what they probably took out of the house and analyzed on the last search warrant, 50 bags. They believe that Laci was killed by another person in a violent confrontation. They stated that. They changed it from a missing person to a homicide. This just puts the icing on the cake for them. If this is Laci and the unborn baby, now I agree with Bernie and Mark. Now they've got Scott that actually puts himself at the disposal site of the victims, which is the one thing that you try to get a suspect to do, is commit himself to being close to the location of the crime or at the crime. And he's already done it himself. So this interrogation is, if he allows himself to be interrogated after his rights, it's going to be one of those things where he can't go anywhere without making a mistake.
All right, gentlemen, I wish we had more time. We're going to continue to follow this. We have much more on this even tomorrow night. We have lots more on this as this story continues to develop. I appreciate it. And thank you, of course, for being with us tonight. I'll see you all again tomorrow. Until then, keep it here on Fox for the very latest on Operation Iraqi Freedom.
Time for West Coast Primetime News and a late-night update on the East Coast, live from Fox, right now. Tonight, a moment of hope, says the Secretary of State. Iraqi leaders meeting at a former symbol of Saddam's power, working out details for the future of a free, democratic Iraq. As the president confirms the times of the brutal dictator have passed.
These are good days. The history of freedom.
Tonight, the plan for a new government and the pledge from the U.S. to stay out of it. Taking to Crete, the streets belong to the coalition, but the hearts and minds of Hussein loyalists, those are a different story. The lone shout from the crowd, Saddam will return. Restoring law and order in Baghdad. U.S. Marines catching Iraqi bank robbers, getting back their multi-million-dollar take. And the spoils of war. Private First Class Jessica Lynch getting more than a party when she comes home. The news, as Fox reports, right now.
Live from the world headquarters of Fox News in New York, this is the Fox Report with Shepard Smith. Fair news, balanced news, now.
And good evening. It's 8 p.m. on the West Coast, 11 p.m. on the East Coast, 7 a.m. in Baghdad, where the terrorist mastermind behind the Achille Lauro hijacking has been found by United States Special Ops forces in Saddam's backyard. That story, plus, we hope, live to our embedded correspondents overseas and the rest of the day's news in Team Fox coverage on Operation Iraqi Freedom. Simon Marks live at Amman, Jordan. But first, the national security correspondent Brett Barrett live late night at the Pentagon. Hello, Brett.
Hey, Shep. One U.S. official calls it a very big catch. Another says it's more evidence of the tie between the Iraqi regime and terrorism. Tonight, a terrorist who has been on the run for more than 17 years is in U.S. hands after a special operations raid south of Baghdad. Abu Abbas had been seeking refuge in Saddam Hussein's backyard, that is, before last night. Abbas was the leader of the violent Palestinian group that killed an American on the hijacked Italian cruise liner Achille Lauro in October of 1985. Special ops troops seized documents last night, including Yemeni and Lebanese passports, weapons as rocket-propelled grenades, and more than $10,000 in that raid that nabbed Abbas. Also tonight, U.S. officials tell Fox intelligence reports indicate that several of the top 55 Iraqi leaders have now escaped into Syria, something the Syrian ambassador today strongly denied. Also today, U.S. troops shut off an oil pipeline that runs from Iraq into Syria. Defense officials estimate in recent years up to 200,000 barrels of oil a day were pumped into Syria from Iraq, making millions of dollars for both countries in violation of the United Nations Oil for Food program. It's not flowing tonight.
And whether that has completely stopped the flow of oil between Iraq and Syria, I cannot tell you. We do not have perfect knowledge. We do know that they were instructed to shut it down, and they have told us that they have.
In Baghdad, some buildings like the Information Ministry were on fire today. Some looting continues in the streets. But for the most part, commanders on the ground say peace is slowly returning to Iraq. The looting and destruction of the National Museum in Baghdad has brought out critics, saying the U.S. did not do enough to protect Iraq's antiquities, a charge Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld took exception to today.
To the extent it happens in a war zone, it's difficult to stop. The United States is concerned about the museum in Baghdad, and the President and Secretary of the State and I have all talked about it, and we are in the process of offering rewards for people who will bring things back. But to try to lay off the fact of that unfortunate activity on a defect in a war plan, it strikes me as a stretch.
With the success of U.S. troops in Iraq, the number of follow-on forces now scheduled to come in is being scaled back. The Army's 1st Cavalry Regiment, more than 10,000 strong, out of Fort Hood, Texas, had deployment orders. Now they don't. The 1st Armored Division out of Germany is still going in, but now without its artillery. Defense officials say some U.S. ground forces in Iraq will be pulling out soon, while international forces will be filing in. A number of countries have now promised to send in stabilization forces. Those troops including Italian troops, now getting word from the Italian government that they are sending in police forces. And also tonight, senior defense officials tell us, Shep, that Defense Secretary Rumsfeld is planning a trip to Iraq, quote, very soon. Back to you.
Do we know what he will be doing there and what that might mean?
No details yet, but we hope to get some possibly tomorrow.
We do know, Brett, that this meeting happened today or yesterday, Baghdad time, at our under our auspices, if you will. Do we know what was accomplished and how ready they are to start taking things over for themselves?
Well, Shep, it's being described as the first step here, this meeting in Nasiriyah, representatives from a number of different groups inside Iraq to begin talking about the formation of an interim government. But it is in the very early stages. They're going to be meeting again in another 10 days. Officials say they saw some promising things, but obviously some groups chose not to attend, and they're going to be working on that.
You know, Rick Leventhal works under the military's time frame now, not ours. He normally calls in at this hour, and I hope he's going to, and I'll ask him about this too. But last night, Brett, on one of the national, the big three networks, local, national newscasts, a reporter ended his report by saying, and the troops are forced to stand by and watch as the country burns. And I just wondered if that sort of thing is getting any reaction from there, and if that's anything close to the truth.
Well, defense officials here say, listen, they were just as disturbed as anybody to see some of the fires that were set in Baghdad and other places, some of the looting that has gone on across the country. However, they believe from reports from commanders on the ground that that's beginning to come to an end. They think that things are starting to move on to that next phase. And as Iraqi police now step up, more than 2,000 of them back on the job in the city of Baghdad, as more of these international forces come in to start moving to that stabilization phase, they believe that those images are going to essentially start coming off of the screens because there just won't be as many of them. We have been seeing a lot of those images, and here at the Defense Department they say it's not really a true portrayal of what's happening on the ground in Iraq.
It sounds as if, Brett, some other countries are willing now to come in and help out, and that we might end up with a very broad-based coalition here before this thing is all over with.
Yeah, Defense Secretary Rumsfeld mentioned Poland today. We know Italy has stepped up. We can tell you that the UK is going to be bringing in military police to be doing some patrols on the ground. And of course, the U.S. Army will have their own MPs on the ground. We told you about the 1st Cav not getting deployment orders. Some elements will be moving forward to, again, provide stabilization.
All right, good stuff. Brett Baer at the Pentagon, we'll get back to him for breaking developments. Brett, thanks very much. So what do you do about Syria? Is that rogue nation, as the White House is now calling it, really harboring members of Saddam's regime, and his family for that matter? The U.S. turning up the heat as some other Gulf nations take notice. Our Team Fox coverage continues. Simon Marks live at our newsroom in Amman, Jordan. Simon?
Hey, Shep, the U.S. turning up the heat, and in this part of the world, that worries many governments that say that after ousting President Saddam Hussein from power in Iraq, they are worried that the United States may have Syria and perhaps even Iran on its radar screen. The message today from the United States government to the government of President Bashar al-Assad in Damascus: we are shutting you down. We are turning off that pipeline that was illegally funneling oil from Iraq to world markets via Syria. It's been known for years that President Saddam Hussein was smuggling oil through a number of different routes in direct contravention of United Nations sanctions. That pipeline between Iraq and Syria was certainly making Syria good money and was one of the reasons relations between the two countries had improved so much in the past couple of years. Of course, Damascus is also being warned by the United States about weapons of mass destruction. Before the war began, the U.S. feared that Syria was acting as a repository for Iraqi WMD. Tuesday, the Syrian government refuted allegations that it is developing its own stockpile of chemical and biological agents. It's complaining that Israel should now be the focus of U.S. attention, but it's getting lonely out there for the Syrian government. And finally, Syria in the crosshairs, of course, because of continued fears that it is offering sanctuary to Iraqi leaders, perhaps even including Saddam Hussein himself. The Syrians deny it vigorously, but Saddam's half-brother was arrested over the weekend a mere 15 miles from the Syrian border. And there are reports today that a Syrian resort town on the Mediterranean could be a place where the surviving members of the Iraqi leadership are heading. It's now reported that the U.S. government is offering big money, up to $200,000, for any information that leads to the apprehension of key members of Saddam Hussein's regime. Meantime, 6 Gulf states got together today and issued a statement saying that they are very concerned that the United States could soon be threatening Syria. They want Washington to ratchet down the rhetoric, and they say that having ousted Saddam Hussein from power in Iraq, it's now time for U.S. forces to leave the country. Shep?
Live this Wednesday morning in Amman, Jordan, Simon Marks, thank you. Rebuilding a nation now. The work is underway inside Iraq, the first talks on the country's future. The meeting site, a makeshift American air base in a town thousands of years old. 80 Iraqis on hand, Muslims, Kurds, and supporters of Iraq's monarchy, out of power now for half a century. At the onset, America's representative insists the United States is not interested in running things in the long term.
I can assure you that on behalf of the United States, and I think I speak for the coalition, that we have no interest, absolutely no interest in ruling Iraq.
Well, the goal, a democratic government, likely to be years, he says, in the making. More discussion on this with our embedded correspondents coming up as war coverage continues.
Coming up.
The president saying he'll accept a smaller tax cut. But critics in Congress say he still has a couple of $100 billion to go. These volunteers working to help our men and women overseas, but this group saying some scam artists are using its name to rip off the American people. And what's the latest on the ground in Iraq? We'll talk to our correspondents as they become available and ask them your questions from your email. From the news capital of the world, live to homes around the globe, this is your news, fair and balanced. This is Primetime News on the West Coast, a late-night alternative to local news in the East. This is a special edition of the Fox Report from FNC.
It was not my dream to realize this day. The day a father watched his daughter start at Juilliard. But I embraced that dream with unwavering attention and made it my own, because that was the dream of my client. And that's what I do at Morgan Stanley, one client at a time.
There comes a time
to call it a day.
Easy.
Finally.
A serious faucet.
Growy?
Growy.
Come on, Dad. You can do it. Faster, Dad. Keep going, Dad. Let's go, Dad. Bring the fella at the top. That's my dad. He's going all the way up. You're going all the way up to the top, right, Dad?
At least you can count on Toro mowers. Guaranteed to start on the first or second pull. Or we'll fix it free.
Updating Greta's last story, now all signs point to a major and deflating discovery. An infant found on the waterfront, the umbilical cord still attached. Then the next day, a woman said to be wearing maternity clothes seen dead on the waterfront. Both found not far from the spot where Laci Peterson's husband says he went fishing on the day his pregnant wife disappeared. Tonight, a news conference and word that it could be a coincidence. Now we wait for DNA testing. A Fox Report now from Dan Springer, live tonight in Modesto, California. Dan?
Yeah, Shep, in the earlier news conference today, the coroner's office was saying that they still do not have a positive link between the adult body found yesterday and Laci Peterson, but all the evidence is mounting and it's all pointing in one direction. In fact, so much so that if it turns out that it's not Laci Peterson and her unborn child, it really would be a shock. In fact, the police were asked at a news conference a few hours ago if there is any evidence pointing in any other direction to anybody else possibly belonging to this body, and the police in one word answered it, no. So you can see that it's all moving in one direction. The female body was discovered yesterday. Within a few hours, Modesto police had a team of investigators working the Peterson case at the Bayside location. The body was badly decomposed, reportedly missing limbs and the head. Matching DNA will apparently be the only way to make a positive identification, and that could take anywhere from a few days to several weeks. While the coroner tries to make a link between the baby found Sunday and the woman's body found yesterday, they're also investigating cause of death and other key details to any criminal case.
From this person, we hope to get a better idea of how long the body may have been in the water.
Laci disappeared Christmas Eve. She was 8 months pregnant. Her husband, Scott Peterson, says he was fishing near the Berkeley Marina that day. Well, the bodies both washed up just a few miles from the Berkeley Marina. Laci's family, through a spokesperson, seems resigned to this being Laci and what would have been her first child.
If this turns out to be Laci, we want the animal responsible for this heinous act to pay. We will do all we can to pursue justice for Laci Ann Conner.
Modesto police were asked tonight, where is Scott Peterson? The spokesman for the department says he didn't know, but if he did, he wouldn't say. Scott has never been named as a suspect. He has also never been ruled out as a possible suspect. And Shep, as you know, investigators always want to rule out the people closest to those who disappeared. They've never been able to do that. The cloud of suspicion has followed Scott Peterson almost from day one. There was a report shortly after she disappeared of him having an affair and also some things that he has done that has raised suspicions. And so the police being very tight-lipped about his whereabouts, saying that they would not indicate where he is if they did know. You got to believe that they know where he is and that they are in contact with him throughout these developments. Shep?
Dan Springer live for us tonight in Modesto. A new plan for finding weapons of mass destruction. A new path to take toward the killers which the White House says it knows Saddam had. Tonight, the details in an update from U.S. Central Command. The world's largest airline saying 3 labor unions needed to agree to pay cuts to keep the carrier out of bankruptcy. 2 went along. 1 did not. Tonight, questions about the future of American Airlines. And it's tax day. If you haven't filed just yet, you're almost out of time. And on this day, the president announces he's willing to accept a smaller tax cut idea. But Congress may not be willing to come along. Those stories and our embedded reporters as available coming up, plus breaking news on China, Korea, and nukes just in. A live report up next.
Tomorrow, Bush's blueprint for tax cuts. Can his plan help stimulate a sluggish economy, the job market, the street? It's the politics of business on Your World with Neil Cavuto.
Change that to 6. I'm happy to meet him. Get Preeb on a plane today, okay? I need him here. I'll take the meeting, just keep it short. Well, just as long as I'm out by 7. Hang on a second. Thomas, did we get a new car?
Oh, no, sir. Your car is in for service. This is my car.
Surprise yourself with the simple elegance of the Ford Taurus. If you haven't looked at Ford lately, look again.
Lucy! I'm home! Yoo-hoo! I'm home! Welcome home, Helen! Alice! Ricky! Wilma! I'm home! I'm home! I'm home! I'm home! I'm home! I'm home!
Home.
Huh?
There's no place like it. For 100 years, people have been coming home to Andersen Windows.
Hello, my darling sweetheart face.
Long live the home. Andersen Windows.
I'd like to start getting home delivery of the New York Times.
Now you can get the New York Times delivered to your home for 50% off the regular price for 8 full weeks.
The New York Times brings the world into our house every day. It's not just that they cover the news so well. It's the way they surround a story, giving me so many different ways to understand what's going on.
Call 1-800-459-3226 today to start getting the New York Times delivered to your home. You'll receive the Times every single day for just $5.75 a week.
I need to understand what's affecting our investments.
And what's happening on the web.
Or if you prefer, subscribe to the Sunday edition alone for just $2.90 a week. That's 50% off the regular price of home delivery.
The world's moving pretty fast out there.
This definitely helps.
Get the New York Times delivered every day for just $5.75 a week, or Sundays for just $2.90 a week. That's 50% off. Call today.
It's 20 minutes past the hour with breaking news now on Fox News Channel, and this just into us. Talks between the United States, North Korea, and China about the nuclear crisis in the Korean Peninsula are expected to be held in Beijing next week. That from South Korea's news agency and reports from Washington. The news agency quoting unnamed authoritative diplomatic sources saying the three-way country meeting is a compromise with the U.S. in their desire to have talks with the communist North Korea's insistence on direct bilateral talks with the United States. So a meeting next week, China, North Korea, and the U.S. Taking to Crete with relative ease, but the U.S. Marines now finding out that the hearts and minds of the locals in Saddam's hometown may be a different story. Let's get a late-night Fox report now from Chris Klein, live this Wednesday morning into Crete.
Shepard, yes, indeed. When we arrived into Crete yesterday, a decidedly lukewarm reception by some of the local civilians. It must be said that some of them were pleased to see us and were pleased to see American Marines enter the city and waved and smiled. There were others, though, that gave us decidedly hostile looks, and even some others that used some choice curse words in broken English. Mind you, a lot of the population of this city, like most of the garrison of this city, Iraqi garrison, isn't even here, and really melted away before the arrival of these Marines from the 1st Division, and specifically these Marines from the 1st Light Armored Reconnaissance Regiment of the 1st Marine Division. As you had mentioned, the resistance was not what they expected. However, it should be qualified where they did encounter resistance, that it was quite dogged, apparently from irregulars and remnants of Special Republican Guard units, as well as apparently a relatively large number of jihadists, so-called jihadists, Muslim volunteers from Jordan and Syria that came here to defend what ultimately was clearly a doomed regime. There are still some of them about. We understand that there are isolated pockets of resistance throughout the city, and indeed the direction that we came from into the city from the north via Kurdistan is still not secure. You might recall that 2 days ago, no less than about 6 teams of journalists trying to enter the city from that route were fired upon and took casualties. And indeed, one team of reporters is apparently missing and may have been taken by Fedayeen. Of course, right now, as I speak, you can see behind me the facade of one of the buildings in this enormous palace complex, one of the 2 palace complexes here in Tikrit, in Saddam's ancestral home ground, in his Ba'athist and tribal stronghold. But nothing could be a more fitting symbol of the collapse of his regime that I am surrounded by heavily armed and confident Marines. The regime is no more, and there could be no more fitting proof. We understand also that there are special forces elements operating here who we believe are likely targeting some of those remaining diehard resistors. We've also seen overnight a clear Marine presence in the air, as well as Huey helicopters and Cobra gunships patrol the city in coordination with Marine patrols on the ground. And to be sure, the city is indeed clearly in Marine hands. Shepard.
Chris Klein live tonight from the Iraqi northern town of Tikrit. Now, the clock is ticking. Less than 30 minutes to mail your returns here on the East Coast. On the West Coast, only 2.5 hours or so. The IRS saying 1 in 4 taxpayers puts it off until the last few days. So there were plenty of long lines at post offices across the nation. Internet filers up from last year, but still just 2 million total, according to the IRS. A Philadelphia mother attending a candlelight vigil for her missing 2-year-old son when she learned he'd been found. Tyree Hand found safe about 60 miles away in Atlantic City, New Jersey. He disappeared Sunday night from his North Philadelphia home, police arresting a Philly woman on suspicion of kidnapping.
Did she take you on a bus?
Okay, yeah.
And were you scared? Were you crying?
That's the question of the day, isn't it? Atlantic City cops saying they found the suspect and the boy sleeping in a hotel lobby and took them to a shelter. While they were being processed, a security guard remembered seeing the child in an Amber Alert bulletin and called the police. A boy gunned down in a high school gym was armed at the time, according to police in New Orleans. The 15-year-old shot dead yesterday in front of 200 other students. The coroner finding a handgun while preparing to do the autopsy. Witnesses saying 4 people stormed the gym and opened fire with an AK-47 and at least 1 other gun. The shooting wounded 3 other students. Now we know, this just into Fox News Channel, that police have 8 suspects in the case and 7 of them are in police custody tonight. The former Klansman and U.S. Senate candidate David Duke is now in a federal prison. Today he started a 15-month prison sentence in Texas for mail and tax fraud. The feds say Duke created or cheated on his income taxes and schemed supporters out of hundreds of thousands of dollars using cash to gamble. Duke denies ripping off his backers. He says he intends to be a model prisoner. While we wait for our embedded reporters to log in from Iraq, time for a quick trip across America. Missouri, an early start to the wildfire season, and it's being blamed on unseasonably warm and dry weather across the Midwest. This fire in the St. Louis suburbs burning about 30 acres and threatening several homes as well as an apartment complex. Brush fires also causing problems in North Dakota, Iowa, and Wisconsin. Virginia, 2 teenagers rescued after spending a long, cold night on a deserted island in the Appomattox River. Their raft capsizing while drifting downstream, both teens reportedly doing fine. New Jersey, a pilot crashing his small plane on a golf course near Robbinsville and walking away with only minor injuries. The single-engine Mini-Max is an experimental craft bought in a kit and assembled. This one's history. Virginia, the USS Boise and its crew of 138 sailors now home from the war in Iraq. The fast attack sub is the first one based at Norfolk to return. The Boise spent its deployment in the Mediterranean and Red Seas, launching Tomahawk cruise missiles. The sailors seeing their families for the first time in 2 months as part of a Fox Watch. Across America. The SARS epidemic far from under control, killing 9 people in Hong Kong and claiming its youngest victim in the process. Protecting Iraq's oil for the Iraqi people. That was a major goal going into the war, and the mission continues even with Saddam out of power. And everyday Americans working to support the troops. Their efforts being hurt, they say, by people looking to make money the dishonest way. All of that on a late-night live edition West Coast Prime of The Fox Report.
You're watching The Fox Report with Shepard Smith on the network America trusts for fame.
NASCAR Bud Bowl qualifying lives on Speed Channel.
Qualifying is important. Probably one of the most pressure situations you're going to be in all weekend. Your weekend normally goes pretty good when you sit on the pole.
NASCAR Bud Bowl qualifying on Speed Channel, the home of NASCAR TV.
A shift can change a person, a life, the world. Or it can simply change the way you move through it.
Watch my dark circles, puffiness, and wrinkles disappear instantly. Sudden Change Under Eye does it. It's guaranteed to give you these results instantly. Sudden Change Under Eye Lift.
If you're overweight, remember 2 words, green tea. Mega Green Tea weight loss caplets can help you lose up to 20 pounds without drugs. Mega Green Tea for fast weight loss.
Suffer with scars from surgery and other causes? Then you need ScarZone, the scar diminishing cream to help fade away scars. Your scars need ScarZone.
I leave work at 7, start my trip home, and that's when I make my call to my son. It gives me some dad time that much soon. It's like being home with him before I actually get home.
With Singular 7 to 7 plan, your nights start 2 hours earlier at 7 p.m. No one else offers that. Plus, get nationwide long distance and get a free phone with a $20 donation to Special Olympics.
I call it the Kyle Lewis It's Important My Night Start Early plan.
Come into Singular now to find the plan that fits you best.
Emerging science suggests that lycopene is one of the ingredients in tomatoes that may help reduce the risk of heart disease.
Now Centrum and Centrum Silver have lycopene, another reason to take your Centrum.
New Centrum with lycopene, now more complete from A to zinc.
Tomorrow, the new war on terror. As we stand ready, capable, and able to defend our nation from mounting global threats, are we stretching ourselves too thin? Plus, the president's plans, from jump-starting the economy to rebuilding Iraq. We have reaction, analysis, and insight. At 5, it's the big story. At 6, watch Special Report. At 7, it's the Fox Report, only on Fox News Channel.
It's 8:30 on the West Coast, 11:30 on the East Coast, 7:30 a.m. in Baghdad, where many are now asking, did Saddam Hussein and some of his regime get away to Syria? And if so, will Syria cooperate in getting them back? Many are now calling, including one administration official who's quoted in the New York Times, Syria as part of the junior varsity of the axis of evil, saying that Syria, Libya, and Cuba are the JV of the big three. Brett Baer's checking into all of this. He's live at the Pentagon for us once again. Hey, Brett.
Hey, Shep. Yeah, Syria is a major concern for this administration, and they've been sending signals all week long trying to make the point that Syria needs to get its act in gear in order to not, 1, protect Iraqi regime leaders, 2, to not have and continue to develop weapons of mass destruction. We heard this all week long. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld leading the charge, but also from the president and, of course, from Secretary of State Colin Powell. Now, today, U.S. officials tell Fox News that several of the top 55 Iraqi leaders have now escaped into Syria and are seeking refuge there. Now, they wouldn't get into names or specifics, but they said 7 of those top 55, the playing cards, the deck of cards that we've been seeing, several of them are believed to be inside Syria. That is something that the Syrian ambassador to the United States strongly denies. Take a listen.
We did not allow any a person or anybody from the Iraqi leadership or anybody from the Iraqi family to come to our country. We said it also in order to explain to American people and to the other people all over the world that Syria has closed its border with Iraq.
Defense officials say Syria has been a real problem from the beginning of this war, letting fighters into Iraq from Damascus and from throughout Syria, also funneling equipment into Iraq. That equipment, weapons, and night vision goggles through Syria. You're taking a picture, look here at Damascus, and we can tell you that defense officials are concerned tonight that Syria is harboring some of these Iraqi leaders. Chef.
Hey, Brett Leventhal's on the phone now. As it turns out, he has a little breaking news for us. Rick Leventhal, Levens with the Leventhal, he's been on a raid there with forces inside Iraq. Rick, what happened?
Well, it was a pre-dawn raid, Chef. We left before the sun came up to try and they were after 3 Ba'ath Party members, 3 Fedayeen who working for the government, military intelligence officers, one of them handling enemy prisoners of war. These are 3 guys who are in a neighborhood not far from the base where the 2nd Battalion 23rd Marines are located. So they got a couple hundred Marines and a task force rolled in here before the neighborhood woke up. And it was a success as far as the colonel's concerned. There were no shots fired. They entered 2 homes. They got 3 men out. 2 of the 3 are definitely, they think that 2 of the 3 they were looking for. The 3rd they're not sure about. They're going to take these guys to higher headquarters for interrogation, but they're sitting outside one of the 2 houses right now. They're going through the house looking for documents, weapons, and other materials, and they're going to collect that stuff and bring it on back.
Is that the first one like that you've been on, Rick? What was that like?
It is the first one that I've been on, and it was pretty interesting. I mean, you know, they had a briefing last night about midnight local time, went through maps of the neighborhood and details of how they're going to carry this thing out. We went in a convoy this morning of numerous vehicles. There were, some 200 Marines, a bunch of Humvees with heavy weapons, and Marines also, carrying weapons are on foot across the neighborhood. They pulled a Humvee with a loudspeaker on the roof up in front of the first house and broadcast messages in Arabic to the people to come outside. They were prepared to blow the doors open and make a forced entry if they had to, but as it turned out, they didn't need to do that.
Hey, Rick, it's Brett at the Pentagon. Listen, do you know how this all developed? Was it intel from a tip on the ground, or was it something that they had developed in that particular town?
Yeah, my understanding is that this came through intelligence as they spoke to locals. They've been looking for these guys. One of them worked at the detention center across the street. He was an interrogation officer at the detention center. The other one is a military intelligence officer and head of handling enemy POWs. These guys were considered dangerous, and these guys were considered to have done some pretty bad things while they were interrogating people in custody, and could well be held for war crimes if, in fact, they were in charge of handling the POWs who were taken during this particular conflict. The neighborhood is described as somewhat hostile. You don't get the waves here that you get in other parts of town. So they were on guard and concerned that this thing could turn ugly pretty quickly. They knew that there were weapons in the homes, and in fact, I saw them bring one AK-47 out that they said was found loaded under a rug. But again, this thing went off very cleanly so far, at least.
I guess it's just after 7:30 in the morning there, Rick. What time did this thing get started, and what was the night like?
We were up at 4:30 a.m. We got into this convoy of vehicles. We rolled in here quietly, got out of the vehicles a few blocks away, and then walked in a couple of columns. It was still dark. Everyone took up positions on the corners and along the walls outside these homes. It's a very densely packed neighborhood with single and two-story houses, many of them connected, and they all have walls out front with gates. So, you have a street, a sidewalk, and a wall, and then the homes behind the walls. And the Marines lined the walls. They took positions on the corners, waited for it to get light out, somewhat light out, and then began broadcasting those messages.
They told us it was going to be down to the nitty-gritty kind of stuff here pretty quick, Rick, and it sounds like we've gotten to it. This thing could be really tedious over time.
Yeah, and they keep finding stuff, not just looking for people like these guys, but they keep finding weapons caches, and they have 56. They say 56 weapons caches they've identified this zone alone. And this is just one small section of Baghdad. And the gunfire continues. We heard a lot of gunfire last night. Every night when we go to sleep, or just as the sun's going down, the gunfire begins. And it's sporadic but repetitive. It goes on and on throughout the night.
56 weapons caches in that zone. I don't know about this zone thing. I mean, are there a lot of zones within Baghdad? And how many weapons are you talking about? Any clue?
Well, I've seen several of the weapons caches, and we're talking about schoolhouses with numerous classrooms filled floor to ceiling with RPGs and the rocket-propelled grenades and mortars and tank shells and large shells for the heavy caliber weapons. And one school had tractor trailers parked out back filled with more of the same. And that's one of the 56. So there's just a tremendous amount of munitions. They're blowing the stuff up on the hour, sometimes on the half hour, but there's just so much of it, and some of it, there's too much of it to blow up.
Hey, Rick, people here at the Pentagon are telling us that this is how it's going to go down, that they're going to get scraps of intelligence, they're going to follow it up, they're going to try to get these regime leaders and hopefully eventually get weapons of mass destruction. What I'm interested in is what happens to the documents. You know, you've reported that they've found tons and tons of documents. Well, that's a lot of stuff to go through, and obviously Marines are not sifting all through it. Does an intelligence team come in? What goes down?
Much of this will be taken, what I'm told is that the documents are taken to higher headquarters, that there are intelligence officers who will look at it, not necessarily Marines, could be Army. The intelligence officer with the battalion is inside the house right now. In fact, he just came walking out with a briefcase and what looks like a pistol holster. They gather what they can from these people, and they have other experts who look at it and try to determine what they've got. I mean, that other site that we were at earlier in the week, the Iraqi Ministry of Intelligence, they found a bunker down below that was just crammed full of personnel files, just stacks and stacks and stacks, potentially thousands of people's personnel files, and all of that could be evidence linking the regime to crimes against people. So it has to be looked at. But it's going to be a huge job.
And did those guys put up a fight? You said there weren't any shots fired, but was it they just came in? They surrendered quickly?
It took a while for them to respond to the messages, and it took a while for someone to come out and get a gate open. But there was talk going between the fence, between the Marine and family members. I was told that they didn't put up resistance, but they definitely had attitude.
Hey, Rick, is this just the first of many projects today, or what's ahead for your bunch?
Well, they're doing a number of things today. Not all this serious. They have some meet and greets planned in the community, and they also hope to try and trade some food for weapons. Believe it or not, at some point they're going to offer meals if people will turn in their weapons. I don't know how well that'll go, but they're also going on more security-type missions, more urban patrols, and continuing to hunt down these weapons. A lot of this, is coming from intelligence sources, as the intelligence officer just carries out what appears to be a large knapsack filled with potentially documents, or maybe military uniforms of some sort. It looks like a military-style bag. He's got a CD-ROM in his hand, and he's now trying to open the briefcase in front of me.
Okay, well, here's what we'll do. Rick Leventhal is obviously standing outside what is a very active scene inside Baghdad. We'll get back to Rick to find out what they're discovering in there and whether any of this paperwork and the rest. Plus, the lighter side of things, you heard that the folks got packages, right? Well, we're going to have Rick show them to you in this tape piece that he did earlier, and we'll talk about that. Where is Rick? Well, we'll try to get him up on the video phone at some point. And where in the world is Greg Kelly? I've gotten your emails. We'll talk about that coming up, too, in just a moment on this special edition of the Fox Report.